Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Chris Willingham. I'm a cloud solutions architect here at VMware. Welcome to the Azure VMware solution discussion on expanding our storage with the Azure Netapp files. Joining me today is Gabrielle Scalf, an associate cloud solutions architect, also here at VMware, and Frank Pulliam, cloud solutions architect at Netapp. To start the process, what we're going to talk about is what is Azure VMware solution, just as a quick overview and introduction. We have other content for that if you would like a deeper dive. We'll talk about the additional resources and the additional content later on. Then we'll introduce a little bit more of the detail of Azure VMware solution, and then we'll turn it over to Frank to talk more about how we can expand storage with the Azure Netapp files solution.
So now let's really look at what comes with AVS. So we refer to our host as nodes. We have three different node types with AVS. We have AV36, AV36P, and AV52. So the way we determine the best match for your organization is we usually run an RV tools or live optics to make sure that you get the correct memory, storage, and CPU for your organization. So we have a minimum of 3 nodes to get started with AVS. And just to go break down each one, so AV36 comes with 576 gigabytes of memory, AV36P comes with 768 gigabytes of memory, and AV52 comes with 1.5 terabytes of memory. And this graphic just shows down the responsibility matrix. So a lot of our customers really enjoy the fact that with AVS, they can relieve the burden of having to manage hardware and software, right? So since it's owned and operated by Microsoft, they're going to handle all of the physical infrastructure, the physical security, the AVS portal, hardware failures, the host patching and upgrading, and the customer is really just responsible for configuration of NSXT, identity management, vCenter, vSAN, and setting up your guest OS, integrating your applications and your VMs. So AVS is offered in 24 different regions globally. And as the product has continued to grow, so is our presence globally. So I know we currently have some up and coming in India and some more in South America. If you don't see a region here that your organization is in, I do recommend that you come to this link so you can get the most accurate, up-to-date, and some of the roadmaps locations that we're headed to. And so now I want to kind of just at a high level, go over one of the most important parts of AVS, which is the VMware HCX. HCX is VMware's migration tool. This is what is used to migrate your VMs from your on-premise environment or even from another cloud. So as long as it's a vSphere-based VM, you can migrate it back and forth into AVS. So let's say you have a presence in AWS or Oracle. You can use HCX to go back and forth, creating that multi-cloud environment. And I now just want to go, at a very high level, some of the connectivity and networking of AVS. This is really our standard architecture for AVS. So here we have the on-premise environment connecting to AVS via an express route. So an express route is not needed for AVS. You can also use a VPN connection, but we do highly recommend express route because it creates a very seamless experience. So once the Azure private cloud is provisioned, you're going to get 2 Microsoft Enterprise Edge routers. This Enterprise Edge router is used for north and south traffic. This is an express route gateway. An express route gateway is a virtual network gateway that is going to exchange IP routes between networks and really control and make sure that the network traffic is appropriate and going to the correct locations. And so for the 2 edge routers to communicate with one another, we have a private, secure, high-speed, low-latency express route. This express route is part of the backbone of AVS, so this is going to come with your licensing. And this dedicated edge router is used to connect AVS to the native Azure and part of the AVS networking. And so for the flow of this information and the traffic and the 2 express routes to communicate to one another, we use Global Reach. So Global Reach is an express route circuit that connects the 2 express routes without having to hop over to the VNet or interrupt any of the traffic there. And this enterprise edge router can also be configured to connect to the internet. Okay, and now let's, kind of take a closer look at some of the storage platform offerings within AVS. So vSAN is VMware's software-defined storage solution. It's built from the ground up for vSphere virtual machines. It abstracts and aggregates locally attached disks and a vSphere cluster to create a storage solution that can be provisioned and managed from the vSphere and vCenter web client. VM storage provisioning and day-to-day management of storage can be controlled all the way down to the specific VM level, creating policies that can be set and modified on the fly. The size of the raw capacity of a cluster is the per host capacity times the number of hosts. So for example, a 4-host cluster provides 61.6 terabytes of raw capacity in vSAN. AVS vSAN supports RAID 0, 1, 5, and 6, but the default storage policy is RAID 1 with the object space reservation set to thin provisioning. Microsoft will provide alerts when capacity consumption reaches 75% to make sure that you don't hit your maximization on storage. vSAN's data stores use a data at rest encryption, by default using keys stored in the Azure Key Vault. And now let's look at some of the external storage options that you can use with AVS. So some of the most common and one of the ones that we recommend the most is Azure Netapp files. So in addition to using your AVS storage, what you can do for storage intensive workloads is add an external storage like Azure Netapp files. And Azure Netapp files is a enterprise class high performance file storage service. Azure Netapp files supports any workload type and is highly available. And you can go into the Azure Netapp files portal and set performance levels, create Netapp accounts, capacity pools, volumes, and manage data protection. A lot of our customers really love Azure Netapp files, again, when they have a very storage heavy environment. So let's say you have 3 nodes and that's just not meeting your storage requirements. Instead of scaling out that 4th node that could potentially create access and let's say CPU or memory, you can tap into the Azure Netapp files, which then solves that storage problem for you without creating waste. And so I'm now going to pass it over to Frank, who's going to do that deep dive and really give us a better picture of what Azure Netapp files is.
Thank you, Gabby. I appreciate that. And also thank you, Chris, for the introduction. So my name is Frank Pulliam. I'm a cloud solutions architect on the Azure team at Netapp. And my primary focus is on the Azure Netapp files product itself. So I want to open up by kind of discussing a little more deeper detail about what Gabby was speaking to around the sort of the mismatch that can occur. So in a perfect world, as she mentioned, you purchase AVS nodes, and those AVS nodes, as she kind of described, they're kind of like t-shirt sizes a little bit, and it really works out well for an environment that is uniform in respect to the ratio of CPU and memory to storage. And if those are kind of in line together and grow uniformly, that's a great answer, right? It meets all of our needs. But what we find with most customers is they tend to be heavy in one area or another, and will essentially, it introduces a significant problem, particularly around storage. And when you lose that uniformity and you get kind of into the situation where you've got much more storage than you do compute or memory in comparison, that will then introduce a situation where your only option outside of the use of Azure Netapp files is to expand the cluster with additional nodes. And the result of that is essentially, at the end of the day, cost waste or inefficient cost. And the result being that you are spending money on CPU and memory that you're simply not leveraging, you're not using, you're just buying them to get the disk. And so we want to try to overcome that. And the way that we can now do this is by introducing Azure Netapp files as a data store in addition to the vSAN storage that you get with the nodes. And this really will help us solve that problem. We're going to walk through this And kind of in a detailed fashion, we're going to talk about one of the early on customer successes that we had and how that played out for that customer and their real world situation. But before I do that, I do want to hop in to explain what is an Azure Netapp Files, because most times when we're talking to customers kind of outside of our ecosystem, even they might be longtime Azure users. Sometimes we talk to people at Microsoft that don't even understand their own solution here. So Azure Netapp Files, straight away, just like AVS, just like the VMware solution, it is owned and operated by Microsoft. It's first party. It is not third party. It's not something you procure from NetApp or through the marketplace. It is wholly owned and managed and supported by Microsoft, managed just like any other first party Azure service through the portal. You can utilize templates, PowerShell, CLI for automation, all the typical tools that you have. And again, purchased through Microsoft. So that is going to be a dollar for dollar drawdown on any commit that you might have with Microsoft. Where the NetApp piece comes into play is it is a co-engineered partnered solution between us and Microsoft. They are leveraging our bare metal in their data centers. So it's all flash arrays that are hosted in the Azure data centers. It's unlike some other storage solutions that are actually located outside of the Azure data centers and sort of peered in. This is next to the compute in the data center, and it allows us to drive ultra high performance, as we'll kind of discuss. Gabby kind of mentioned it's essentially like an on-premise enterprise class storage, except it's in the cloud, right? It really is bringing that enterprise grade experience to the Azure consumer. And the way that you get to consume it is when you turn on a volume, you can set them up as NFS or SMB or both. We have a dual protocol. And on the performance side, and this is really where it's kind of a match made in heaven with AVS. So we can drive, if designed appropriately from a networking standpoint, we can drive a sub-millisecond latency, and as of today, up to 4.5 gigabytes per second per volume. That's a big B there. And I stress the as of today because we've got some public preview features that drive that up to actually over 10. And we are by nature or by default, it's going to be an HA solution. Simply by turning it on, you're going to get 4 nines SLA in the region. And then going a step further, there are a number of built-in data data protection features, built-in snapshots, backup and replication technologies. And in addition, and we're going to talk about this, the ability to tune performance on the fly, meaning non-disruptively, which I think is hugely important to the design of something like an AVS architecture. But we're not really going to dive too much further into ANF in terms of technical pieces and parts. That's another conversation for another day. But I think it is important to understand the 3 tiers, because this will come into when we talk about our best practices, some of the decisions that you will make. And so those are broken, the tiers are broken out into standard, premium, and ultra. And you'll see the relative pricing for each one of those on the second line. The pricing, like most Azure services, varies a little bit from region to region, but this is tends to be kind of the average that we see. And the line under that, you'll see the throughput. And so if you remember me mentioning a moment ago that it's our all flash arrays in the data centers. So whichever of these tiers that you pick, standard, premium, or ultra, your data is still living on the all flash array. It's not, we don't utilize different disk or slower disk or anything. And so the tiers are simply network QoS policies that dictate the level of throughput that you get to a volume. And you'll see kind of the metric that we use listed again here in the middle. And something that I'll point out is when people think about storage, they tend to kind of size it for capacity, and then they will kind of back into the performance numbers that way. It's important to note how you design this. If you look at Ultra, for example, and you just see 40 cents per gigabyte per month, it's the most expensive on paper. However, if you look at it as a price per performance, it's actually the most cost-efficient option. So if you're looking to get to a particular performance number, typically the cheapest way to get there is going to be through Ultra, because you're getting, for example, twice the throughput that you would get with Premium. So 64 compared to 128, but you're only paying 10 cents more per gigabyte per month versus, say, double that you would expect. And so different times that you'll use these different solutions, and we'll break this down a little bit into what this means for AVS in just a moment. So the AVS integration with ANF is by and large pretty simple. We'll talk about the architecture in a moment, but once the architecture is in place, it really is as simple as adding ANF, an ANF volume to be available to a cluster or clusters. We can actually present the volume to multiple clusters, which is unique in terms of a data store in AVS. And we assign that, and it pretty much immediately shows up in our vSphere environment as a data store that's available for us to now begin creating VMs. We can vMotion over to it. It acts and behaves just like any other data store in vSphere. So you'll have that familiarity as you manage the solution. To dive into one of the early examples that we worked with, this was actually during the preview period, and the customer had and I will admit, this is a little bit unique in that they were very storage heavy, but it shows you what is possible with this integration in terms of dollars and cents and efficiency. So this customer had roughly about 750 VMs in their on-premise environment with roughly about 400 terabyte of storage. They wanted to do a full migration in 6 weeks. So really tight timelines. They did not want to go down the path of looking at third party. They wanted to stay native with Azure with all of their technology. And that's, again, ANF being a native solution, it fit the bill for them. And when we looked at their environment, it's really a matter of the highest common denominator. So on the top left-hand side, you'll see that their environment, if the decision is driven by the level of CPU need, they only needed 5 nodes. If driven by memory, that stepped up to 14. But if driven by storage, it would require a lot more. In this case, 52 nodes because of that storage overhead that they had present. So by introducing the ANF solution as a data store, they were able to go back to the next highest common denominator, which was the memory. That dictated the 14 nodes, and we added roughly about 300 terabytes of ANF, which presented some pretty fantastic savings in their case. And again, I will admit, this is a little bit of an outlier. These numbers are also with all retail numbers out of the Azure price calculator. Obviously, the customer is getting, they're probably doing reserve capacity, reserve nodes, and driving their costs down. And the savings that will still be very significant. I think in the end, this was probably roughly about 25% savings. But on paper, let's just take for a month-to-month kind of pay-as-you-go option. This reduction for a solution that was going to cost them close to $4 million annually, by using ANF, we were able to reduce this down, the 14 nodes, add the storage, and the result was almost roughly about 45% savings, about 1.7 million annually. They almost cut this thing in half, which made it palatable for the customer, and was kind of a win-win for everybody, and allowed them to then migrate this into Azure and meet their budget needs. Again, a little bit of an outlier there, but it still shows what is possible, and sometimes we see in the real world. I will tell you, in my experience that I have seen, we typically will be in the savings realm of anywhere from about 15 to 25% at the end of the day. So some of the best practices that we have, and you'll see the design here in the architecture. So on the bottom right, you're going to have kind of a zoomed out version of what Gabby presented, where the AVS private cloud is set up, and you'll have your vSAN storage, for example, as part of that bare metal, right? The Azure Netapp files piece, and something that's important to point out here, ANF, unlike some of the other storage options in Azure, there are no public endpoints for ANF. It's whenever you design it, part of the volume creation is you're going to have to tell it a delegated subnet inside of one of the virtual networks that you have set up of where you want ANF to be injected into. That is the only way those volumes can be accessed. And that's given the enterprise nature of the solution, you would expect from a security standpoint not to be able to publicly access this data in any way, shape, or form. So in doing that, with it living, essentially Azure Net Files living in its own VNet, we have to establish the connectivity and guarantee the connectivity to our AVS private cloud. And we do this with the use of an express route gateway. And really, these are the more, and we have a lot of documentation out on Microsoft's site about how to set this up. And quite honestly, this is the more difficult part, and it's really not difficult, but it's the more slightly involved part to set up the networking, get that in place before we then begin to actually introduce ANF into AVS as a data store, which you saw the previous screen really is kind of just like a one little wizard. You fill that out, it connects in, and boom, it shows up in your vSphere. That's the easy part. But you do want to be careful about how you design this for communication purposes. So some of the best practices that we have, first off, you always want to take advantage, for most cases, you want to take full advantage of your vSAN storage that you are paying for. I know that kind of goes without saying, but in addition to just making simply dollars and cents, if you will, it also is important to note that vSAN, because it is tied to that bare metal, it is going to be your highest performing storage solution in this design. And so, for example, when Chris and I work together and we architect out a solution for a customer, one of the first things that we do is we look at a snapshot of their performance in regard to their virtual machines. And we want to take the highest performing, the most demanding VMs, and we want to house those on vSAN. Typically the performance delta that we see is we can drive roughly about 70% of the overall performance with ANF in comparison to vSAN. So keep that in mind. Typically it's far and away more than enough than you will typically need for any VM, but by a best practice, you want to make sure you're putting those highest performing VMs on vSAN, maximize that storage, and then use ANF as the overflow. And obviously things like non-production test machines, dev machines, certainly we're gonna target those for ANF, but that's not to say that we can't handle production VMs by any stretch. It's just a good best practice to land that on vSAN when possible. Now, when you are designing ANF, you want to pay attention to the capacity pool tier that you're choosing. So standard, premium, and ultra. I bolded premium here because I will tell you that is typically where we will land as a starting point, unless the metrics or the information dictate otherwise. We very rarely will use standard. And so again, premium's usually our starting point. And there are certainly times when we'll need to step that up to ultra. Now, I'll talk about when you make this decision with the capacity pool, this is not something that is set in stone. And I'll talk about that performance tunability in just a moment. But we obviously want to make the best decision up front. The more performance information that you have going in, the better decision you can make. The next thing is that when you're creating the ANF volume, it will ask you whether this is going to use basic network features or standard network features. Basic or standard network features came about roughly the middle of last year. They went GA. There were a number of things that really held us back on the basic network feature set. It was really kind of the Gen 1 versus Gen 2 Azure networking. And so we will need some of the functionality that standard network features provides us in order to build this solution out. And when you create that express route gateway, you'll want to use the ultra performance SKU, and you'll want to enable fast path on that gateway. And that's going to really kind of guarantee the throughput that you're looking to get between ANF and AVS. And the last thing, so when you build out Azure VMware solution, unless something has changed, I don't believe that you have the ability to select your availability zone. But nonetheless, once an AVS private cloud is built, you can go into the overview, and in the properties, it will tell you where the availability zone, where it's located, one, two, or three, depending on the region if you have all three. But it will tell you which one it's living in. And so you'll want to make note of that. And when you deploy an ANF volume, you'll want to make sure that you've leveraged the availability zone placement feature, which will then give you a drop down when you're building the volume and allow you to select that same availability zone so that the volume lives in the same physical building more or less than the AVS private cloud. Very important. All of these are very important to guarantee the performance that you would expect to have on a solution like this. So on the performance side, and this is really something that is unique to Azure Netapp Files, we wanted to give customers the ability to dynamically tune their performance on the fly, non-disruptively, right? We don't want to have to be moving or migrating data to get higher performance. We want to give customers the ability to do that. You really have two ways to accomplish this. And so the quickest and easiest is simply to add capacity to the volume. When you add the capacity, you'll get that additional throughput in a matter of seconds. And we do a demonstration of this using a performance tool that we can show where the performance, it literally is instantaneous. You'll get that throughput. And again, that's because we're still using the all flash arrays. We're simply just turning up the QoS policy to allow more throughput to the volume. And so that's very easy. And you can do that, by the way, up or down to your heart's content. And so let's say you get a service call that comes in, or you get a notification from a monitoring system that a VM is, or a set of VMs on a node are, the performance is degraded. One of the quickest things you can do is hop in, turn that knob, right? Turn that volume up, give it more throughput to take that performance issue from the storage side off the table. Let's just immediately do that. Know that we're getting higher performance from that and see how that begins to impact our performance so that we can start to troubleshoot if there's issues in other areas. Now, on a longer term basis, let's say that over time, we have an environment where, hey, the performance needs have just crept up. And we really don't want to just add capacity. Maybe it's sitting on a premium tier right now, and we don't want to keep adding capacity to give it more throughput. We want to do something more permanent. So at that rate, what you can do is go and create a second capacity pool. In this case, I've created an Ultra one, and you can non-disruptively, and again, within just a matter of seconds, migrate that volume over to the Ultra tier, right? And then you can go back and reclaim your space on this original capacity pool. This is something this is not something you want to do kind of every day. In fact, you can go up anytime you would like, but once you go up a tier, you then have to have a 7-day waiting period to go back down to a smaller or a slower tier. So keep that in mind, right? This is not really something you want to do on an everyday basis, but the volume up and down, or the capacity up and down, is something that you can do to your heart's content to meet your needs. And so these are unique, and these are very important in terms of providing the level of service to your end users that they expect, and are really very simple, quick things that you can do non-disruptively to meet those needs. There's something else that you'll want to, if you begin to take a look at leveraging this solution, one of the quickest and easiest ways to determine if ANF can be a benefit. So we've got a link on our website that allows you to essentially pull this up, this estimator, and you'll see in the top left, there's an import button. We can take our RV tools, import this into this tool, and it will then give us an overview of what the environment will look like without ANF here on the top bar, and then with ANF added in, and the different storage tiers that we leverage. It will tell you if savings are possible and how much those savings are meant to be. and give you different options. I would encourage you, if you want to use this tool, it's a publicly available estimator. You can jump out there and do that. But I would encourage you to engage not only your VMware team, but reach out to us at NetApp, and VMware has the contacts if needed, and we'll help you through this. There are some things to take into consideration, but this is at a high level a great way for you to get an understanding of what the possible savings might be, if any. And we will admit, it's not always there, right? If you're not storage heavy, this is not going to make a lot of sense for you. All right, so to kind of summarize and wrap up, and we'll take a few minutes here for Q&A. So the idea here being that you can expand your AVS data store independently now as you need and as you desire, away from your compute and memory. You can leverage ANF because of that low latency and high throughput that we talked about. We also have customers that will use it as in-guest storage, by the way, again, because of that performance and everything that ANF can provide for us. So you can certainly take advantage of it as in-guest storage in addition to the data store. That non-disruptive performance tuning, don't forget that. That is something that again is going to save you because you will have performance issues at some point in time. Having those tools at your fingertips is going to be very helpful. And as you kind of go forward, and there'll be some announcements, by the way, coming around our ability to perform VMware consistent backups, but the data protection features that are built in to ANF are really kind of best in class. So snapshotting, cross-region replication, and backup. So don't miss out on those things if you're leveraging ANF. If you need anything from our side, again, VMware can reach out to us, and we're happy to assist with these engagements and help you design these and help with any other needs that you have with ANF along the way. So with that, Chris, I believe we had a question in the chat. Do we have anything that popped up?
We do not have any open questions at the moment. Please use the Q&A tab to ask questions. So let's talk about what we have for additional resources. And there are a couple, right? So there's documentation for both AVS and ANF. As Frank and Gabby said, both of these solutions are Microsoft first-party services. And so when I go to the next slide and show you the link, you'll notice that it's a Microsoft domain for both AVS and ANF. And the documentation is there on how we integrate those tools together. We also have at VMware, the VMware hands-on labs that you might be familiar with from VMworld and VMware Explorer. We have several of those. I'll provide the link to the hands-on lab portal. There's opportunities also to test the solutions. So work with your VMware account teams and your Microsoft account teams to walk through a test plan on how we can utilize both solutions together. As Frank mentioned, we have several customers who have storage heavy workloads that are taking advantage of both the capabilities of AVS and the ability to extend the storage to ANF without having to consume additional nodes. It's a powerful partnership between VMware, NetApp, and Microsoft, and we hope you'll take advantage of it. Here's some of the links that I was mentioning. Note again, these are Microsoft links. So the top one is how do we connect the Azure Netapp files to the Azure VMware Solution hosts as an NFS data store. That's that top link. And more information on the Azure VMware Solution generally is the second link. The link to our hands-on lab page is there, labs.hol.vmware.com. And then the VMware AVS Solutions Architecture team, so Gabby, me, and our peers, have put together a YouTube channel with additional information about the Azure VMware solution, including the solutions that Gabby mentioned, like HCX for migration. So lots of resources available to you for AVS and for the Azure Netapp file and our partnerships. With that, any final questions? We haven't had any questions yet. Hopefully we get a few. Well, with that, Frank, Gabrielle, great presentation. Thank you for your time today. And to our attendees, thank you as well. This is being recorded. The link will be available on the registration page that you joined today. And this and other AVS events that we've had over this quarter and prior are available for further review as well. So thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.